I have with me Ettienne le Roux. He is Chief Economist at RMB. Ettienne, thanks for your time. What worried me, I'll tell you, was that the decline was almost across the board. 4 of the 5 major sectors that you look at were down. And I'm asking myself, how can businesses get it so wrong? In the first quarter, they were all over the moon. Now here we are. They have gone the other way, almost like the American election, where you've got Barack Obama, sort of extreme left and black, if you like. And then on the other hand, what do you get? Donald Trump on the far right. And I can't use the other words that I want to use. Why did we drop so much?
Well, Godfrey, I don't think it is too difficult to explain. In the first quarter, we saw business activity in many of our sectors being weak. And yet in the first quarter, business confidence increased quite sharply, obviously helped along by the political developments that we saw in the beginning of the year. In the second quarter, now fast forward to the second quarter, we had activity in many of those sectors that you've mentioned, staying disappointingly weak, in actual fact in certain instances worsening, and then we have Ramaphoria fading in the context of the sharp increase in the petrol price, which is certainly something that we can't dismiss.
Sure.
A global picture that is becoming less favorable for emerging markets, including South Africa. The currency weakening, which is obviously good news for some of our respondents, but bad news for others. The land reform debate intensifying. All of these things obviously weighing on confidence. And in the context of that, I don't think the 6-point drop that we saw in the second quarter BCI is then too big of a surprise. One positive thing to note is that at a level of 39, it is still quite a bit higher than the 29 that we saw in the second quarter of 2017.
Right.
So we saw a dip in the second quarter of this year, but I think the trend at least is upwards, even if only tentatively so.
Importantly, Ettienne, what does that portend for the second quarter in terms of GDP growth? I'm even worried to say growth.
Yes, so what we've seen is that our business confidence index has got quite a nice correlation with year-on-year growth in GDP.
Right.
So just remember that while GDP contracted by 2.2% at the annualized rate in Q1, the year-on-year growth rate was still 1.5%.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, it is not necessarily too bad news for a year-on-year rate expectation in the second quarter.
Yeah.
What is, I think, more important is, and I think this should be the more overriding objective of government, is this tentative increase in business confidence that we've seen over the last year.
Yeah.
How do we preserve that, and how do we make it last for longer?
Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing, particularly at a time when global headwinds are mounting and cyclical factors domestically is going to become a little bit less favorable. So we're under a fair bit of pressure here, to the extent that if we can't rely on world developments and on inflation falling and interest rates falling even further, how are we going to get growth higher? So we have to engineer our own growth. Yeah,
and you mentioned 2 factors that you think could be important here in terms of getting that confidence back into the economy. Number 1, finalization of the mining charter, and then secondly, the issue around land expropriation without compensation. Let's begin with the mining charter.
Yes, that is just 2. Godfrey, I think what is interesting is that yesterday, you probably noticed, but yesterday the IMF also published a press release on South Africa. And there they've got a long list of stuff that they suggest the government implements immediately from a reform perspective, that they believe can make a significant difference to business confidence, investment, productivity, economic growth.
Sure.
And clarifying regulation about mining is just one. And giving us greater certainty or clarity regarding the government's plans about land reform is 2. But there's a long list of other stuff that can happen immediately. And I want to highlight 2 there, which was also on the IMF list.
Yeah.
The one is, if we complain about a shortage of skills, that's an inhibiting factor when it comes to economic activity, why don't we make it easier to import those skills? In other words, there are visa regulations that must be relaxed in order to ease those pressures.
And how long have we had this conversation?
It's not new. None of these ideas are anything new. The government is just dragging their feet. And the sad reality is that we're running out of time. That's another kind of a low-hanging fruit that can make a significant difference. And then, of course, the other other one possibly is to allocate broadband spectrum to the private sector so that we can improve competition in the sector.
Yeah.
Those are things that can happen quickly, and I think we can make a substantial impact,
right.
not only on confidence, the mood, but also on economic growth.
And what's your sense? Do you think the government has got the political will to be able to implement those?
Well, I think it is not only a question
ahead of an election.
Well, that's going to be the tricky thing. But sadly, I don't think that government's got a choice anymore. If these policies are not being implemented at a time when globally things are turning against us, the sad reality is that we face for quarters to come continued subdued economic growth to no one's benefit.
Have you had to revise your economic growth forecast for 2018?
So luckily, we've been conservative in our forecast for quite some time.
Sure.
We have a 1.7% growth number for 2018.
Right.
That is slightly higher than 1.3 of last year. But
you can just say it, Ettienne. You can just say we were right. We was right.
It is still low, too low, to be honest.
Absolutely, Ettienne. Let's leave it there. That's Ettienne le Roux. He's Chief Economist at RMB.